we're here today with something a bit different, not our usual kind of talk. We thought we'd introduce something new, and to talk about grief at the end of a relationship, and all of the complexities that come with that, and how your previous experiences of loss can really impact your experience, of the end of a relationship. So Julia is here, our wise, wonderful
Hello.
friend Julia is here to discuss all things end of a relationship. And we're delighted to have you all here today. If any of you are in the middle of the end of a relationship, or going through that process at the moment, my heart really goes out to you. It's really, really tough. And I hope that we'll be able to offer some solace here today, and maybe some words of comfort, and maybe some good tools and strategies as well. So should we dive right in then, Julia, into why is it so intense? Why can the this grief that we experience at the end of a relationship, why can it be so hard?
I mean, for many, many reasons. I think one of the first kind of insights to really acknowledge is that often the end of a relationship isn't really legitimized culturally. I think people think, oh, you break up, you get over it, you get on and fight. People say things like plenty of fish in the sea, and actually it's what I call a living loss. So it has exactly the same components of grief, but it's a grief from someone who's alive, but it feels like it's a death. So it feels like a bereavement, with all of the emotions of loss, of sadness, fury, confusion, anger, feeling numb. And it can really hit our confidence, our sense of ourself. In the same way as grief from death, it can feel like it's the end of a future that you imagined. It's the end of who you thought you were, that we were a we, and now I'm just a me. And of course, I think we'll come into this. There are many aspects of it that make it worse or better.
Yeah, for sure. I think that loss of the future is one of the hardest things about it, and you can kind of feel the cogs of your brain turning, trying to change course. You're like, okay, all of that over there, right, that's not happening. And that's the bit that I know personally I really always struggled with, was, oh, my life is now going to move in a completely different direction. And oftentimes it's not what you want, or it's not the outcome that you want. But also, even if it is your choice, it's still really, really hard.
And I
So
think when it's, how the relationship ends has a big impact on how we feel about that. So if it's sudden and unexpected, and you suddenly feel dumped, and you don't fully understand why someone has broken up with you, or you're ghosted, or it just suddenly they start behaving differently, you can get completely preoccupied as to trying to understand what happened, and that can send you back ruminating on the whole relationship, looking back on, is it because I did this? What if I could have done? Why didn't I? And in grief, going back and trying to fix it in the past so that your present is different is a very maladaptive coping mechanism. The thing we have to do, as difficult as it is, in recognizing that our future is very different from what we wished or wanted, is that we have to kind of lean into the pain of it, lean into the loss of it, find support to manage that pain of it. And also to acknowledge, even if it's a relationship that we ended, because I think somehow there's this idea that if it's happened to you, if someone breaks up with you, it's worse for you. But actually, I think breaking up a relationship, which may be very good reasons, the person may not want to have the future that you wanted, they may not want to have children or live in this country, and that can be extremely painful too, because you miss the person, you just know that you didn't have a long-term relationship.
yeah, for sure. And I think actually it's harder when you've ended the relationship in some ways, because you know, when somebody ends a relationship with you, they're taking the decision out of your hands. You sort of, you're on a journey and it's taken out of your control. Whereas when
But
you end,
people hate that though, Ashley. People hate not having control.
yeah, but you know what? I think I found it harder ending a relationship because I had so many that they were the ones that haunted me for years afterwards. That I would kind of like, oh, what if? Maybe I shouldn't have ended that. Maybe I could have made that one work. But you know, everybody, like all grief, everybody is totally individual, and everybody's
Yeah.
experience is totally individual. Um, I wonder if we could kind of come on to there was one other thing I wanted to say about that. That I think that the ruminating thing is really, yeah, you can definitely go down a bit of a rabbit hole with that. And leaning into the pain, I know that when I was going through my many breakups in my life, I would kind of replay the record of the relationship and almost kind of, you know, put myself through that pain of going back to the happy memories and going back. And, you know, I remember like it'd be painful walking past a pub that you used to go to together, and
Yeah.
it would be, ouch, you know, it would be like, oh my God, and you'd be crying. But that is a really necessary process for me because it was actually making peace, you know, grieving for it and making peace with it, and also going back to those places on my own for the first time and creating a new history there.
And
Yeah,
that's very, I mean, that echoes people who are listening who've been bereaved by death. That is a real echo of that experience of loss, is that, you know, the first that you do of everything once the relationship is ended is similar to the first time you do anything when someone has died. And I think one of the, you know, I don't think we can measure feelings, and we are all very unique and individual. But the one way I think of helping you legitimize how much you feel, and some people may feel bad that they don't feel very much, is the emotional investment in the relationship, the level of the love, the level of what you expected, the level of what you wanted. If that then suddenly ends, or ends, you know, that you agree it together, that is a huge loss. And that loss, as you're talking about, that we need to both find our way into allowing ourselves to feel the pain of it, because that's how we face the reality of it. And that's how we kind of learn, and grieving is a form of learning, how we learn to adjust. But in order to do that, the big thing we need is the love and connection of other people, which I always say about grief from death. But we really do need to turn to others, and turn to ourselves with compassion. Like, you know, I think in a breakup, as you said, when you ruminate, you can really self-criticize. Like, I was an idiot. I did this, I did that. Why didn't I? What I said, no, I wasn't going to go. That's probably what did it. And so kind of be self-compassionate, but also go to friends and really talk about it. I think one of the things that is great is if you can gather, you know, it's in movies and stuff, but I think it is a real thing, is like get 3 or 4 of your best friends around with you and thrash it out. Talk about the things that were great, talk about the things that were awful, talk about what you missed, what you wanted, and really kind of, because then I think it's other people, you feel supported by the number of people in the room, and I think that's very powerful.
absolutely. Like I remember, so I'm not sure if I should say this, but I remember breaking up with probably one of my hardest breakups, most significant relationship at the time. Well, one of the most significant relationships in my life. And I had finally ended it after multiple attempts. And my friends, it was a Saturday morning. It was about this time on a Saturday morning. And all my friends came over, and I remember them showing up with vodka. I'm just thinking, what am I going to do with that at 10 o'clock in the morning? You know, but they were like, we're here, we have vodka, it's all going to be fine. This is a good decision. So I think, but I think also in each
And
relationship,
I, as a therapist, I'm not 100% sure I condone the vodka,
can I
by
just
the way.
say I didn't drink the vodka? Like it was too early. And yes, drinking is, yeah, it is problematic in many ways, and you know,
I
especially if,
think what the vodka represents, and of course people drink, and I'm not against drinking, but what I mean, anesthetizing against pain with alcohol isn't probably the best way. But what the medicine is, they showed up,
yeah,
they charged in. The medicine was love. It's like, well, you're going to be okay, and they gave you that pull, like, we're going to make sure you're okay. You're not carrying this on your own. It's not just all in here. We're going to have some fun. You're going to cry. You know, you're going to have some vodka. We're going to play. and we're going to laugh. I think we can really laugh in grief too.
Yeah, sure.
The
Yeah.
dark humor, like picturing yourself as a little old lady who's never gonna those things that on your own at 4 a.m. really properly seem real and haunting,
Yeah.
but you can release them and kind of let the ghost of them fly away when you talk about it with your friends.
Yeah.
They say, I'm going to be coming down that aisle with you, we're going to be together.
Yeah, yeah, totally. It's so important because it does feel so hopeless at times. And like you say, in those 4 a.m. kind of moments. How does your history of loss and your history of maybe bereavement affect your experience of a relationship ending?
It really affects it in two ways. One is um a new loss will always bring back previous losses, and your kind of story that you tell yourself will also be informed by your previous losses. So if you've had a lot of previous losses and this is another loss, it will kind of go in and compound the sense of loss, that I'm someone who, I can't have loving, trusting relationships. Bad things always happen to me. So you can kind of give yourself a really negative narrative, which then, of course, you can use to sort of feel bad about yourself. And that what you need is to kind of trust that you're going to be okay, and to have hope. But also it links to how you manage loss, and it links to our kind of primary attachment model. So if you have secure attachment and you've had predictable loving relationships, you are more robust to manage the loss, because you feel basically fundamentally, I am enough, I am lovable, I am good enough, and I can trust myself. If you've had a insecure attachment, that will play out in how you feel about yourself and how you feel about your future and how you manage it. And so it's much harder to let yourself feel the pain. You can kind of need to use lots of maybe maladaptive coping mechanisms to block it, because you feel you don't feel robust enough to let the pain come through you. You want to kind of squash it.
Yeah, I think that's really, really a very important point, I think, about insecure attachment and how it will make it feel so much more intense. And I assume we have quite a few people in the audience here today who have suffered bereavement as well as a relationship breakup. And yeah, I just want to say that we're here for you today.
Yeah,
That is
yeah,
incredibly intense. Um, and yeah, it's a lot, isn't it?
there's a lot.
Um, what
I think
are,
one of I was when we were talking about that, I think some of the things, if you have insecure attachment, or you're just in the process of grieving and you feel this sense of internal chaos, I think having external structure, so you need people most, so that is your kind of biggest thing, is to get your friends and rely on your friends and see your friends. And if you're a friend of someone who's breakup, be the person that shows up. But also, I think what really helps in this kind of internal storm that we feel and the pain that we're in is a kind of soft structure, so that we kind of give ourselves time and opportunities to feel what we need to feel to express our grief, but also a soft structure of work, and that we have our natural agency doing the things that you can do, like going to work, but also maybe trying out new things, like being a bit daring, pursuing new interests, trying out new hobbies, because that will help give you the wherewithal to go back and do the lost work, so that you kind of you're having to learn. So in the learning, you can learn to be a different version of yourself, and that can help give you confidence.
oh yeah,
And I think in the big life events of our life, we also have the structure of rituals, and rituals are like habits with soul. And the rituals are so important. We have them at births, we have them at significant birthdays, we have them at burials, at funerals, not necessarily burial. And so I think developing a ritual, again, with friends who are witnessing it for you, about the end of the relationship is very helpful. And the kind of thing I would think about is that you would collect, say, 3 things that represent the person who you've broken up with. And it could be things that you love, things that you hate, things that, you know, what 3 significant things. That a rock that represents you, stubborn, or whatever it is. Get those 3 things and do whatever feels ritualized to you. You may gather them with flowers, you may light candles, and then talk to your friends and say what you're saying goodbye to, mark it, acknowledge it, feel what you feel, and then go and do something that shows that that thing is over. Bury it, burn it, wash it away. Do something that lets it go, that marks the ending. And I think that can help you in this kind of new path of this new version of yourself that you're adapting and growing into. It's a kind of portal into this new future that you didn't plan and you didn't want, but you are now facing.
Yeah, that's really lovely. I think that that's, yeah, that would be a really nice thing to do with your friends. One thing that I always find really helpful is journaling. You know, all
Yes.
of my journals, I've kept a journal for, since I was, I think, 8, but they're all they're all focused around breakups. And I was, amazing at writing in them when I was going through a breakup, because your brain just feels like such a mess of emotions, because you're grieving for this person, but they hurt you in some cases, and you didn't want them to go, and they're gone, but they're still alive. Oh my God, they're with somebody else. It's just, there's so much going on in your brain that I found journaling was great at kind of getting it out of my brain and onto a page, and helping me to kind of put my thoughts into some kind of order.
And I
And that,
think that is, it's very well evidenced. There's the Harvard study that shows journaling is almost as effective as talking treatments. And that it is that thing of what's inchoate and messy inside. When you put it on the page, doesn't have to be beautiful writing, but you get the words out, and then you can create a narrative. And narrative is a very important part of how we manage difficulty, and the narrative we create for ourselves is a very important part, what we're telling ourselves.
yeah.
And so journaling is a very good first step into what I'm feeling and who I am now. So you can say, I feel terrible, and you can say, and I want to feel like this. I don't want to be stuck here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. We were talking about what the worst things are that you've had said to you when, you're going through a relationship breakup. And, I know that I've had some particularly insensitive comments when you're in the grips of like what feels like for some people, it's the worst grief they've experienced so far in their lives. It's likely that you're going to experience the
Absolutely.
grief of the end of a relationship before you experience a bereavement, if you're lucky.
And to add into that, it influences your future relationships, because if you don't do the work after the end of this relationship that is required, so that you get your internal world and your sense of yourself and who you are and your value of someone who is worthy of love, who can give love, if that is still quite threadbare and damaged and wounded, you take that version of yourself into the next relationship, and that will in some way fray or damage that relationship. I'm not saying that you have to be kind of totally sorted, because it does depend who you meet and who that person is. But I think if you don't do any of the processing work before the next relationship, it really affects the next relationship.
Totally does. And you just keep on reliving the same patterns in different forms repeatedly until you really, I think that brings me on to another question actually about, I have 2 actually. One, I think around the end of a complicated relationship, or where the ending is very complicated, because I think that that can mean that you hold on to it for a lot longer, like with complicated grief, that you're still thinking about the end of a relationship, 10, 20 years after it's happened. What's your advice in that, around that?
I mean, I think first of all, it is, as always, to acknowledge that this is very complicated. And that would be probably where you're ghosted, or someone disappears, or, there's some way that you just feel utterly kind of left and you had no idea what was happening. So it feels, quite traumatic. And I think the work of it is to acknowledge it. I think the work of it is to grieve the relationship that you had, to grieve the ending that you would have wanted, to grieve the future that you wanted, and to find ways of regulating your emotional system. Because when you go into a very heightened state, which you do if it's a very kind of shocking, indigestible ending, to find ways of getting yourself down to a kind of calmer place. Because when you have a calmer way of being, not in fight or flight, you have more brain power. Your hippocampus is online, your neofrontal cortex is online, so you can think better, you have greater wisdom, and then that gives you more resources to feel good about yourself, to imagine a different future, to do things that are good for you. Because when you're in a very heightened state, you just have you're in a protective mode, and so you'll just do anything to get it to stop. And that's where you can develop maladaptive coping, but like, stop the pain, I can't bear it, I can't do it. Whereas if you go to a calmer, more regulated place, you can choose better and tell yourself a kind of calmer story that soothes you.
Yeah. What kind of tools would you recommend for that?
Well, you know me, I always talk about exercise, that running lowers your cortisol levels, that it's a circuit breaker, a combination of running and doing any kind of breathing, a box breathing, even for 2 or 3 minutes.
Yeah.
You breathe in for 4, hold for 4. Breathe in for 4, hold for 4, breathe out for 4, hold for 4, and you do that round. Even that it tells your system you're not under threat.
Yeah.
And it's your emotional system in the middle here, ventral vagal, is your social engagement system. So then you're able to ring your mom or your friend, or, be connected.
Yeah, for sure. We have those videos on our YouTube channel, those
Yeah.
breath techniques, if anybody wants to check them out. Um,
Can I
yeah,
say the relationship, the other thing, in my work, one of the things I talk about is the relationship with the person who's died. And I think a big thing that's very complicated is in a divorce or the end of a long-term relationship, or a kind of real heartbreak, is how do you navigate that this person is still alive? They're going off, maybe they look like they're incredibly happy and you're absolutely heartbroken, or they've gone off with someone else or your best friend or whatever it is. And I think what's important in the first months and maybe year is boundaries, is that you need to kind of do things that protect you from being in touch and connected to that person that's broken up with you, because that fuels your why did they do it, or your fury with them, or whatever. So if you're seeing them constantly on social media having fun, laughing, kissing somebody else, it kind of just is incredibly upsetting and distressing. So my big thing would be many boundaries. Do not follow them on social media. Do not ask your friends about them. Say to them they're not going to be your best friend, maybe in a year or 2 years, but you actually have to have a clear ending. Because if you have a clear ending, you have something that you work to that is containing and holding. And then when you've done that, and the pain, you kind of, a lot of the distress is through your system, and you feel kind of calmer and more getting on with your life, then you can think about whether you want to renew your friendship with them or not.
yeah, for sure. Oh my God, cyber stalking your ex is like a form of sadomasochism, isn't
It
it?
really is self-torture.
Yeah, that's like, if you leave the vodka out, you probably won't do that.
But also, if you're a friend of someone who's heartbroken, help them do that. And also, I think sometimes friends can say, did you see so and so? Like, just be sensitive around it.
Yeah, for sure. Yes. Yeah, friends have a role to play in that, for definitely. Um, One of the things that we talked about is about sex,
Yeah.
and obviously, the end of a relationship means the end of the end of a sexual relationship, which can find, and that there begins the minefield of, when is it right again, when is it going to feel right again. And I know, speaking personally and very vulnerably, I definitely used it as a crutch, after I and came out of relationships, and it was awful. It made me feel so much worse. It made me feel yeah, empty inside. And I remember always thinking, oh my God, I'm never doing this again. It's awful. I'm going to be celibate for the rest of my life. So do you have any advice?
I mean, I think that Thanatos and Eros, you know, Freud's terms of death and sex are interconnected. And sex and what Esther Perel calls erotic energy, which is different from sex, is a life force. So grieving is a death force, and you have to kind of grieve the story, the narrative, what that means to you, and feel the pain of it. And we need to allow ourselves in that oscillation between loss orientation and restoration is to have erotic energy and life force and sex. And so for some people, actually having sex with people who they don't know would really calm them, make them feel better. For you, it made you feel worse. And so I don't think there's a right or wrong. I think what's important is that you know yourself best and you know what works for you, and to kind of use your wise adult mind in making those decisions. And if you have sex with someone and you feel awful, kind of learn from it. Don't keep doing it, because
Yeah,
we sometimes think keep doing it, maybe it'll be better next time.
yeah,
But what really matters is that we kind of respond to and sensitive to and compassionate to our internal sense of who we are. And it depends what we're using the sex for. If we're using it to feel good about ourselves because we want someone to desire us and them to give it to us from externally, there's a risk factor. If we're using it because we want social connection, we want to have that kind of physical body on top of our body, and we need that, and that's very calming and regulating for us, then go for it. You know, and there's everything in between. So I'm sounding a bit simplistic. But I think erotic energy is a very important part of our healing.
yeah.
And so to allow it, make space for it, give permission for it, and create space for it and create opportunities for it.
Yeah, for sure. I think it also comes back to the attachment issue as well. I think if you have insecure attachment, then it's trickier. I think.
Definitely.
And yeah, just be super kind to yourself and really, yeah, like that's where I think the end of a relationship and the grief that comes with it can get very complicated. And actually, that's where shame can start coming in. I mean, shame comes in anyway, I think.
Yeah.
Maybe we talk a bit about that actually, because I think shame is such a big part of it.
I think the awful thing of the ending of a relationship is the sense of rejection, and then the shame comes from the sense of there's something wrong with me. Like there's something fundamentally wrong with me, and this excruciating. I mean, shame is such an excruciating feeling, isn't it? That it just, you want to do anything to get rid of it. And I think shame grows in darkness when we keep it in, and it does evaporate in the light. So when you can talk to friends about it and how you feel. And thinking about erotic energy, I'm also thinking that, you know, we using our imagination and using our minds, everything we put in our system affects how we feel about ourselves and our system. So if you put in a lot of negative things, like doing lots of awful social media, you're going to feel terrible. But if you put things in your system like going to a gallery and looking at beautiful paintings or paintings of heartbreak, it will in some way release it, because you feel like you're sharing it with someone who painted this picture 5 years ago, 500 years ago, that there's a sense of connectedness and community in heartbreak, and that we can get them from poems and music and art and culture, so that we can see ourselves in other people. And I think one of the most difficult aspects of grief from a breakup is that sense of isolation, and I'm never going to love again. But then you step into the world where you can see that is as painful as it is also normal, and it is part of life. And
Yeah.
that people have written about this forever, and they have heart and wisdom and beauty that they can say about it.
Yeah, I do. I think you need that reflect your experience validated by having it reflected back at you as well. I think that really helps, and we're very lucky that lots of people have created things about heartbreak.
Yeah.
So, and you find the thing that talks to you or that talks to your experience. Just before I come to questions and comments from the audience, I wonder if we could talk just briefly about post-traumatic growth, because I think where relationships are concerned, there is a real potential for post-traumatic growth where you do, I mean, I would say that all of the growth that I've done, all of the evolving that I've done has been through relationships in my life, through the end of a relationship, and through some bad ones, through some good ones, and through some in between ones. I think that it does have huge potential to show, to put a mirror up in front of us maybe and show us, okay, this relationship wasn't right for me at all. I need to really look at that. Why did I choose this person? Why did I choose this relationship?
I really agree. And post-traumatic growth comes from the work of Martin Seligman in the States and Stephen Joseph here in the UK. And what that talks about isn't it always acknowledges the level of the loss. It doesn't say that this wasn't a bad thing. So it always acknowledges the suffering and the trauma, if you like. But what it also shows is that if we kind of open ourselves to allow the full experience in our experience, that we can expand from it, so that in allowing ourselves to feel the pain of it, we also feel our capacity to feel, and we learn that we can survive something that we thought would break us.
Yeah.
And that we learn that love really matters, that relationships matters. It gives us a sense of purpose and meaning about what really is valuable in the world. And it can sometimes link us to a sense of kind of spirituality, or a kind of heightened sense of what we can do, and our hope in the world. And I think when you're talking about what you've learned from the relationships is part of the post-traumatic growth, is because if you really examine your life and your part in the relationship, you learn from it. And that is the protective, what is it? Madness is doing the same thing every time and thinking you're going to get different outcomes. So in the process of examining the relationship and yourself, examining your part and what you would do differently next time, so that is also growth. So I can bring some depth of understanding of how I can be difficult or suffocating or whatever it is.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, definitely. I think every single time it's been like a set of stairs for me. It's been like, oh, okay. And unfortunately, it's been very painful. And there have been many of them. I speak to anybody who's out there today. I have so much experience of this subject, but eventually, I did get to a point where I had worked out what I needed and what I wanted, and that kind of period of my life came to an end. But I really empathize with everybody out there today. I'm going to come to the audience, and I think we've got some kind of comments, some stories, and some questions. From Sophie, what would you suggest if you were going through grief and have no friends or family or support network to share it with? I feel I am just surviving day to day.
Oh, Sophie, I'm so sorry. I mean, can you find through, hobbies or your community ways of connecting to people? Could you join the local choir? If you like art, could you kind of join an art group or a gardening group, or a cycling group? Like finding through your community people who like doing the same things as you, that you don't have to organize and text and not get their reply from, but that every Tuesday there's choir practice, or every Wednesday you go on a bike ride, or every Monday there's an art class, so that kind of fit with who you are and what you like, and find something outside of you that is already set up that you can join. I think that, or the other thing I would add, and this may sound counterintuitive, is volunteering. Because what we know from the research is that when we help other people, it actually improves our mental health. It's good for our self-esteem, and it gives us a sense of value. So it could be that you join your community by volunteering, visiting old ladies, or helping with young people, or whatever it is. But I'm sorry, it sounds very, very chilly and isolating.
Yeah, that's really, really tough. Yeah. Sophie, if you want to send us an email, we might be able to fit you in as a volunteer with Good Grief Festival.
Yeah.
We have some opportunities. Um, I've got a couple here about emotional abuse and coercive control, which is actually something that I do have personally some experience of as well, from two separate people. I'm going to read you both of them because I think there might be commonalities in your advice. So from Sue. I've been experiencing terrible, debilitating rumination. I can't stop it. Any suggestions to stop the rumination? Context: 30-year marriage, hideous divorce still going on after 2 years. I experienced coercive control and had to leave the home as my husband began an affair and I wanted to feel safe. I have been homeless for a year with great support from friends and family, but I can't stop the rumination. And then the second one: I am looking for advice on grieving a relationship which I can't cut off from entirely. My 20-year marriage ended. It wasn't and was emotionally abusive. I can't cut off contact because we have two teenage daughters together, and I need to keep civil contact with him. And he also tries to pull me back in and talk about a future, even though we are divorced. This makes it hard for me to let go and have some space. That's incredibly tough. They're both incredibly tough
Those are
situations.
both incredibly tough.
Yeah.
And obviously, like with all these things, what I say in a couple of minutes is only going to be a small,
Yeah.
but I mean, if you want, one of the ways I help clients with rumination is, if you keep having the same thought, is to picture a television screen and put the image of that thought that you don't want on the television screen, and take up. So if you feel yourself going down the rumination rabbit hole, put an image of that on the television screen, take a breath, change the channel, and put an image on the television screen that feels calming and soothing and safe. Change the channel, take a breath, and do something else. And if you keep doing that, eventually, because our brains like prediction, it will, as you go down the rabbit hole, it will see you and it will change the channel and you'll have a picture of a future that you'd like, or a pretty garden, or whatever it is. And that calms your emotional system. The difficulty with coercive control in both of the relationships, and both being abusive relationships, and obviously the lack of, I don't think closure actually exists, because I think people live on in us after we've ended the relationship, but not having very clear boundaries because you're co-parenting still and have children that you need to be in contact with, I think adds a real level of complexity to what you're talking about. But when you're looking at coercive control, I think the thing that is important to explore and examine is that drama triangle, which is persecutor, rescuer, and victim, and how that plays out, and kind of recognizing what the patterns are and how they affected you, and which role you had. And sometimes trying to step out and kind of looking at those dynamics, like in constellations that got played out with you, helps you understand when they're kind of coming like Jaws music towards you, and allows you to take a breath and move away from it so that you can respond in a different way. Because once you can respond differently to coercive control, the person who's trying to do it to you has less control.
Yeah, for sure. I'd also say there's loads of great resources on YouTube about coercive control and emotional abuse. There's some really, really good channels that I find really helpful.
Great.
I'll dig those out and maybe we can
Send them, yeah.
maybe email us those two people who had the comments, and I'm really happy to share those resources with you. This is an interesting one. What are your thoughts on losing friends when a relationship ends? When people choose sides, or if they were his friends, they ghost you, etc. That's like another loss, isn't it? It's like
It compounds the loss.
yeah.
You not only lose the relationship with the person that you've broken up with and the future you wanted with them, but you lose probably quite a lot of people who they've decided they need to choose. I don't think it's always necessary to choose. I mean, when my best friend divorced, I made a real kind of commitment that we would see both of them, that I would always tell her when I was seeing her ex-husband, and I would tell him when I was seeing her, and that we stayed very good friends to both.
Yeah, but
But
you're like super considerate and sensitive, and I think that most people are not are not thus.
and then kind of 2 or 3 years down the line, if I wanted to, if it was like my birthday, and I would normally have asked them both to my birthday, I would write to them both saying, it's my birthday, I've asked you both. Kind of, maybe you can work it out with each other if one of you's going to come, or you'll both be all right to come. But that is, in a way, as an aside, is, I think, what often happens, yeah, you grieve those relationships. So you feel upset with those people and angry with those people for choosing your partner and not you. And also that knocks your self-esteem, like, I'm not worth it.
Yeah,
And I think, again, being self-compassionate and recognizing the cost of that is really important. I don't know if this is true, and this is biased because I'm a woman, but what I have found is that when women of an older age, and this may be true of young women too, you can tell me, Ashley, is that they feel, once they no longer have a partner, like second-class citizens, and they often feel like they're treated like second-class citizens. So if they go and see a friend, when they used to go as a couple, they were sort of seated in one particular way and weren't expected to do anything. And then I had a client who went to see a friend, and she was expected to kind of help dish up and cook and like be part of the team, because
yeah,
she was no longer had this kind of social value of a couple.
yeah.
And I think there is some horrible truth in that, is that on your own, you're somehow valued as less. And you
I
also,
think
you
woman, yeah.
feel much more exposed going into a room on your own. You just feel more heightened. You feel less protected. And I think that then plays out how you are when you're in the room.
Yeah, I think that's really true, and that was certainly my experience, not with my friendship circle, but with my family. And everybody else was in a relationship. I've got lots of siblings, and I wasn't, and I find that really tough. And you know what? No, probably nobody was doing anything that dramatically different, but I felt so alone in that. You know, when the three of them, when we'd all be together, and I'd be the only single person in a large room of people. I did with friends, I didn't find it that hard, but with my family, I found it incredibly hard. Yeah, so
And I think that when we talked about shame before, I think there's cultural shame about being single
mm,
that isn't fully acknowledged. I think we have, so, our institutions of marriage, our kind of belief in them has softened and maybe even kind of really diminished almost to nothing. But I think there is still very much a sort of cultural norm that we expect this, there must be something wrong with you if you're not in a relationship, or that you've broken up in a relationship.
yeah,
And actually, there's quite a lot of research shows that I can't remember what the percentage is, but a good percentage of people choose not to be in a committed relationship.
yeah.
They choose to be single, and it doesn't mean they don't have great friendships, doesn't mean that they don't have maybe multiple people they have relationships with, or one person that you have a relationship, but they just don't want to be in a committed relationship. So I think our culture hasn't quite reflected how we are behaving and what we want. And it basically comes from the church, doesn't it, that you have to, as
Absolutely.
a be married, be good, have children, and die. That's
Yeah, pay us some taxes. You know,
based taxes.
yeah, that's kind of it. And I think that one thing I would say, I had big, long periods of being single in my life, and they were amazing. I mean, the whole time I was yearning for a relationship, but I do feel like they were amazing times as well, where I was actually coming into relationship with myself. And that would not have been possible had I been in a long-term relationship for most of my life. I had most of my 30s really, and a good chunk of my 40s on my own. And I wouldn't change any of that now. And I had some amazing times. I have a bunch of friends and all these adventures, and I was able to focus on all these other things. And I think there's value in that, and we don't value it enough. We sort of see somebody who's single and think, "Oh, what's wrong with them?" Why are they
Exactly.
not in a relationship? Poor
Poor
them.
you. And it's so
Yeah,
patronizing.
yeah, yeah,
And I
exactly.
think, but also it can be envy, like you're stuck in quite a boring marriage, and then you look at your friend who's in fact having a really fun time. Or I think there's, again, I'm talking from a woman's perspective, and men, please do put me straight, is that when you're single, your friends may see you more as a threat than they used to do. And so that they don't ask you around as much, or they don't want to see you as much, or your uneven numbers. And so that you get kind of sidelined for those reasons, which is to do more with like their sort of fear that you're going to steal their husband or something.
Yeah, I think that's like, I don't know, that's just so weird to me.
I
Like,
know.
it's just so bizarre. I think we should wrap up because we're coming to the end. But I think there's one question here at the end that I think will help us to wrap up. How
Okay.
can we rediscover our sense of self and purpose after breakup? I mean, I've got so many
Question.
things to say about that.
I think recognizing that we have, like the Dick Schwartz work of internal family systems, that we are made up
Mm,
of many parts, many identities. Internally we have a lot of cake, as it were, and that the relationship part of you that is ended is a very big internal wound, and it's extremely painful, and you need to do the work of allowing yourself to feel the loss, but also recognizing the parts of you that are surviving and living, your capacity to love, to play, to enjoy things, to go to work, to be a daughter or a mother or a sister, friend, and that those parts of you, you can do what you can to name them and feed them and nurture them with compassion, so that you begin to kind of recognize there are so many versions of you that are still alive and kicking and have hope. I think in the end, and you lived this, Aisling, in the end, you have to have hope, a little flame at the beginning with a direction that you want to go to, and a plan about how you can get there, and a plan B, and the belief that you can get there. And I think once you have that belief and a kind of plan, you're much more likely to make it happen.
yeah, and I think with a relationship, distinct from bereavement, it's the ending of something, but it's also a fresh new start.
Yeah.
Like, it isn't the same as bereavement in that, you do get this, there is this hope. You can have more hope, I think, about this kind of grief, because it's like, okay, I can be a whole new me,
Yeah, yeah.
and I've got this whole potential and these things that I didn't do, or, what I didn't have time for, or, I'm really going to focus on my personal development and get to, fall in love with myself. I think that, those are all really good things to do if you're feeling that like lack of connection with yourself and lack of purpose at the end of a relationship, is to just say, right, this is an opportunity as much as it is, something that's
A
really
loss. Yeah.
yeah.
And that's post-traumatic growth, isn't it, too? It's like, I can
Yeah.
really learn from this and go on. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I think we'll wrap up there. But really, thank you so much, Julia, for being with me today. As always, I loved
Thank
chatting.
you, everyone who joined us. And I know some of you felt we could have done it in more depth or said more. And I'm sorry if we didn't answer the aspect of your heart that's kind of wounded and weeping. And for those of you that we have, I hope you can use it, and not just hear it, but take it and use it for your benefit and make it kind of action it. I think was really helpful, because we can understand and hear things, but for them to really work, we need to do them and action them.
Yeah,
Lots of love
exactly.
to you all.
Yeah, yeah, and yeah, my deepest empathy goes out to all of you. I've
Yeah,
been through many times myself, and I know how hard it is, but I do also know that it is a window to, it can be, if you treat, it can be a window to, great development in yourself, and greater awareness of yourself, and eventually another relationship. That's the reality, is that for a lot of
yeah,
people, the vast majority of people, you will have another relationship, even though it doesn't feel like it at the time.
yeah. All right. Well, take
Thank
care.
you. Yeah. Have lovely weekends, everybody.
Yeah.
Great to
All
have you.
righty. Bye
Thanks.
bye.